presented by Geico. Phil Yates, Matthew Berry, Stephania Bell, and Daniel Dopp here with you today in our temporary studio for just 2 more days, today and tomorrow. NBA draft, of course, exclusively on ESPN Wednesday night. That's why we're here for right now, for those that are watching. And, oh, by the way, we're on to Week 11. Football season, where have you gone? It seems as though it flies by every year. We have a lot to get to today, and I mean a lot. So we're going to get right into it and start with a Monday Night Football recap. The Vikings improved to 4-5. They've won 3 straight games. I believe they'll win 3 straight more after this. And a big part of the reason why is because they have the chef, Dalvin Cook, who even on a night, Matthew, where he wasn't great, he still gets you 15.2 fantasy
it's
points.
Unbelievable.
Which just speaks to the brilliance right now of Dalvin Cook.
Didn't score a touchdown, didn't have many running lanes, had a big run that was called back because of a holding penalty on Kyle Rudolph. Left the game briefly with an injury, luckily not serious. And yet, despite all that, despite not getting into the end zone, having the big play called back, not missing a little bit of time, 96 rushing yards, caught 4 balls for 16 yards, 15.2 fantasy points. Like the volume, in addition to the talent, the volume is insane. Like, literally, they were getting nowhere in this game running the ball. Still got 30 carries.
It's pretty remarkable. And by the way, as we look back, and there are a couple ways to define most valuable player in fantasy football. It could be the player that was drafted late, who has way exceeded expectations. Someone like Myles Gaskin was that player for a while. Not necessarily the most valuable, but an example of someone who is very valuable. There are also guys who you drafted them and they perform commensurate with expectations. And it feels as though if that's the criteria, that Dalvin Cook and I think Alvin Kamara probably is number 1, but a 2-man tier top, I would say, that ranking, at least in my estimation.
Derrick Henry's right there, too.
Yeah,
Derrick Henry's performed pretty well.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I think it's an interesting conversation for another show, but, based on, I think Kyler Murray's got to be in that conversation, too, because he went 4th or 5th among quarterbacks. I mean, everyone was high on him. Everyone, you and I both said, hey, who's this year's Lamar Jackson? We both think it's Kyler Murray, but he's met those expectations and exceeded them.
We'll talk about that, of course, more as we get closer to the end of the season. A couple other notes from the Vikings, and they're kind of chalky these days, which is good. It's a good thing in fantasy. Adam Thielen had 4 catches for 43 yards, but paid off twice with 2 touchdowns. The first catch, incredible by Adam Thielen. One of those that needs to be rewatched many times over. He had a drop, very uncharacteristic, that actually led to a Khalil Mack interception. But you're going to take 20.3 fantasy points from Adam Thielen in a bad matchup, by the way. And also, speaking of points you'll take, how about 21.5 from Justin Jefferson? A Star is Born, 8 catches, 135 yards on 10 targets. When I say A Star is Born, he was born like 7 or 8 weeks ago when he started to break out. But what a pickup he's been for them.
He's been terrific, Field. We talked about this in the preseason, and I'll say, you said this very definitively from moment one. Who's the rookie wide receiver that I think has the most immediate fantasy impact? And you said Justin Jefferson, not only based on his production coming out of LSU and the expectation he was going to play the slot, which is where we know Kirk Cousins likes to throw the ball, but also, obviously, listen, Stephon Diggs is moving on. Here's an opportunity. It's a perfect fit for him in terms of both talent, scheme, and opportunity. So you've been on that train since the draft, since the NFL draft, and obviously that's paid off. There's been a lot of rookie wide receivers that have contributed, but Justin Jefferson is legit, and it was nice to see after a 2-game slump for both him and Thielen in a tough matchup on the road at Chicago, both to come through with huge fantasy games. I think they're both obviously, legitimate wide receiver 2s going forward. Thielen probably borderline top 12.
So I have a question, if you guys don't mind if I weigh in here.
Yeah, sure.
Because you're talking about Adam Thielen, and I'm confused a little bit because I look at this, and obviously those touchdowns are great, but if you take those touchdowns away, 4 for 43 after 2 struggling games before this, is this not a little bit of a reason to be worried? He's only had 3 games with more than 5 catches all year long.
Well, I think probably the worry, Daniel, is that, remember, before the season began, there was an argument for Adam Thielen as a top 5 wide receiver for the season. So if Adam Thielen's catching 7, 8 passes a game, then he probably is a top 5 to 7 wide receiver. So I think the discount that we're accounting for, as Matthew just said, is it like borderline top 12, maybe more like, or maybe some weeks more like 13 to 18?
But there's a lot of inconsistency at the elite level of the wide receiver. I mean, that's the nature of that position. Like in terms of target share, like he's right up there. And as Field said, like it's kind of chalky, right? I mean, it's like it's Adam Thielen, it's Justin Jefferson, it's Adam Thielen. Yeah. Like of all the teams, you're not really worried about, Olabisi Johnson suddenly, getting 8 targets in a game, right? And like Irv Smith had his best game of the year a week ago. He caught 2 balls. They happened to be in the end zone, so it was a nice fantasy day, but like he ran 9 routes.
Right.
Like their passing game is Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson, and like that's it. So I guess just even though it's a low volume passing attack, the fact that those 2 guys are so talented and that there's literally no competition other than those 2 guys for significant volume, that to me is the difference there.
I'm going to get to the Bears and a couple of fantasy nuggets there about who might actually have some value going forward. But first, Stephania, late in the game, Nick Foles was carted off the field. Of course, when something happens this late in the game, we're still catching up to what the prognosis is. But the Bears head into their bye. Should we be concerned about the possibility of Nick Foles being out in Week 12?
It's certainly a possibility. I mean, last night what we saw was that he couldn't put weight or wouldn't put weight through that right leg. Matt Nagy after the game saying that was either a leg or a hip injury and that he didn't know yet whether Nick Foles would be available after the bye week. Just want to point out, Mitch Trubisky, he's been hurt as well. In addition to being benched for Nick Foles, he had a shoulder injury to his throwing shoulder that he suffered in Week 8, significant enough that he went out to Los Angeles for a consultation with Dr. Elatrash. No surgery at this time. They felt like he could continue to play through it after he rested for a bit. But if you notice, he has not been active because of that shoulder. So it'll be interesting to see who they come up with after the bye.
Tyler Bray, come on down.
I know. Well, Tyler Bray threw a couple of passes, and in fairness, like he's coming in cold, and it's but still, like Tyler Bray threw a couple of those passes. You're like, where's Mitch? Like you're all of a sudden if the Bears, if Matt Nagy's attitude was like, hey, I'm going to make you appreciate Mitch. Good job with that. I mean, Tyler Bray threw passes like I feel like I would throw passes.
Well,
he missed by a lot.
Yeah. There probably are many reasons why he's been on the fringe of being on their roster for a long time, but he could become a much more valuable piece if this Nick Foles injury lingers into Week 12.
Well, yeah, we hope for the best with Nick, and we hope that Trubisky also we hope that whether it's Nick Foles or Mitchell Trubisky, that when they come out of the bye, it's one of those 2 guys, I think, or that they can coach Tyler Bray up.
Our friend JJ, you know him on Twitter, at Late Round QB, posted, I believe it was this morning, it might have been late last night, the Bears actually lead the NFL in passing attempts through Week 10, which is truly astounding because as I'm sitting here sorting through which Bears running backs, wide receivers, or tight ends I would like to start going into Week 12, the answer is Allen Robinson, and I'm doing that because Allen Robinson's really good, not because the quarterback he is playing with is any good. And he's not even like a top 25 consideration at wide receiver right now. Again, no fault of his own. Everybody knows this joke and this story, right? Like Allen Robinson with a better quarterback would be maybe a top 10 wide receiver in the NFL. The quarterback play stinks. Besides that, Matthew, nothing is valuable on that offense right now. Nothing.
I think you're a little bit too harsh on Allen Robinson there. He's wide receiver, even with everything that's been going on. He's wide receiver 16 on a points per game basis here. But I want to piggyback on what you're saying here and just give a little bit more love to Allen Robinson. I had Thirsty Kyle look some stuff up here.
Good.
So first up, okay. So here's the thing about Allen Robinson, right?
Okay.
Last 4 games, he's gotten 1 red zone look. 1.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, you're not like, well, in fairness, they also have Julio.
Right.
Like, what are you doing over here, guys? Like, I mean, we like Anthony Miller and Darnell Mooney's like a nice rookie, but Allen Robinson is the guy. You got to feed the big dog, and they don't. 1 red zone look his past 4 games, 1 end zone look in his past 5. Like, when they get in close, they're not even looking for the best guy on the team. Get this, okay? As a team, the Bears rank 26th. They're bottom 6 in the NFL in terms of fantasy points per pass attempt. That's 24% lower than the league average. 24% lower than league average. If Allen Robinson got even league average quarterback play, and his fantasy points per game rose by that 24%, he'd be averaging 19.3 fantasy points per game. He'd be ahead of DK Metcalf. He'd be wide receiver 4 in fantasy. Only Devontae Adams, DeAndre Hopkins, and Tyreek Hill would be ahead of him. Okay? Per next-gen stats, Allen Robinson's expected catch rate is in the bottom half of qualified wide receivers, right? His average depth of target, by the way, is league average. So, I mean, it's not like he's going on all these deep routes that, where your catch rate would be lower. Like, he's league average depth of target. His expected catch rate, bottom half of qualified wide receivers for his career, he has a 2.1% drop rate. Like, if it gets anywhere near Allen Robinson, the man comes down with it. The problem is that for his career, and especially this year in Chicago, they can't find anyone to get the ball anywhere near him.
Yeah.
Like, it's unbelievable.
It really is.
I mean, like, and they get in close and they don't even give this guy the ball. And I just feel bad for Allen Robinson, specifically because I have Allen Robinson on a lot of teams. I'm an Allen Robinson fan. You guys know this. Free Allen Robinson. Hashtag free Allen Robinson.
But
That's all
Matthew,
I'm asking.
Hold on, but they've got
Yeah.
the hammer David Montgomery at the goal
my
line.
God.
Why would you give the ball to Allen Robinson?
That's a very
Right.
good point.
If Allen Robinson played with Matt Ryan, right? Just I'm picking a guy out of random. Like, is Allen Robinson Julio? Like, are we talking
I don't know
about
about Julio, but he's
right,
close.
but he's in that conversation. I mean, like, Julio's elite, right? And I'm not saying Allen Robinson isn't elite. I mean, I think he is, and they're obviously different players. But I'm just saying, like, if you gave him somebody like Matt Ryan, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
what is Allen Robinson's? And you give Allen Robinson Matt Ryan for his career, the way that Julio Jones has had him for his career, like, it's the same. It's in the conversation. Maybe Julio's slightly better. I don't know, but like, the guy has not only played with bad quarterbacks, but he played with multiple bad quarterbacks. He hasn't been in the same system with the same quarterback the way a guy like Julio Jones has been. Like DeAndre Hopkins has been for most of his career, right?
Sure. Yeah. It's too bad for Allen Robinson. We'll see what the future holds for the Bears at quarterback. And I just want to mention this very briefly. So they're on a bye this week.
Right.
It seems possible, if not likely, that David Montgomery could be ready for Week 12. Of course, he missed this past week because of a concussion. We know from Stephania, nonlinear recovery time. Can't assume anything. That being said, we can evaluate this backfield more further after their bye week. But last night, what we learned was that if David Montgomery is out, nobody is worth starting. Cordarrelle Patterson had 12.3 fantasy points because he had another 100-plus yard kickoff return for a touchdown. He's now tied for the NFL lead. Your boy, Matthew Berry, Cordarrelle Patterson, cashes in.
Called it in 2014, took 6 years, fine, but like, hey, there you go. You're welcome, America.
Yeah,
only 6 years, only took 6 years.
A lot of things in life take 6 years to break out, so you were better late than never, Patterson. But there's no value in that backfield until David Montgomery returns. And then, as we know, the value is very, very average. Let's get to some news because we have a huge show today. And we go back to Stephania here. And we caught this yesterday mid-show, but just to update people that may have missed it and maybe just started to download but didn't actually listen,
Can I ask
Stephania.
you one quick question? Sorry, one quick question because you're the waiver wire guy. Just
Gotcha.
before we get into Stephania, real quickly. If you have the Bears defense, which had another good game, right, again with the Cordarrelle Patterson, I mean, they had 17 fantasy points. Are you holding the Bears defense through the bye week?
Yeah, I would. Okay. Because
I
there's a good
agree,
chance
but
that, like, your quarterback's already had his bye, your tight end's already had his bye, so you might have a little more flexibility there in the back end of your roster.
I agree with you. I just thought that was an important point because that's one decision that I think people are going to have to make coming up to the bye because you hate to carry two defenses, especially in a 10 or 12 team league, but I think they are one of the elite ones, and I think it's worth it.
Stephania, back to you as we go back to the Christian McCaffrey news cycle from yesterday. What more do we learn about CMC?
Well, I don't know that we learned a ton. I'll tell you why. Yesterday started with Matt Rule expressing optimism that potentially McCaffrey could be available this Sunday. But he also said that he remains week to week. So that really sounds like a toss-up. Now, Adam Schefter reported later in the day that, according to sources, McCaffrey was unlikely to play this week. If you think about what we talked about yesterday, this type of injury, it sounds like, based on everything we've heard, that it's really a question of how can he function and how much protection does he need for that shoulder. If you look at how they managed his high ankle sprain, they were tending towards the conservative side. There were times where we thought McCaffrey would be back. They waited a little bit longer, which makes you think they will do the same thing here. There is no way for a running back to play in a game without absorbing contact to that shoulder. And again, I use James Conner as the example because it's recent and everybody remembers that when he tried to come back and he lowered his shoulder and he got hit again, it was problematic. So this is probably going to be an ongoing evaluation. There's not going to be a clear timeline. So while it sounds like based on Schefter's reporting that it's not looking like it'll be this week. I don't know that we have any more of a clear picture than we did yesterday about how he will be on a daily basis.
All right, more on Mike Davis later this week. We've talked about him a bunch. People are familiar with his value filling in for Christian McCaffrey. Good spot for him, though, on Sunday against Detroit. All right, Stephania.
Are they familiar with his value? Like, this is something we'll get into later in the week, but like, he was awesome initially. He's been bad. He has been bad. He has now scored under 9 fantasy points in 4 straight games, despite getting tremendous volume. Like, he had one game where he wasn't, right? But I mean, like, I don't know that we really know Mike Davis's value. We'll get into that as the week goes on. But I'm just saying, like, I don't think he's a no-brainer start despite the great matchup.
Yep, rankings come out later on today, and you'll see Mike Davis maybe a little bit more all over the board than you would expect based off of other weeks. All right, Stephania, maybe the story of the day yesterday in the NFL from a health standpoint is Drew Brees. He went from seemingly battling some shoulder issues to battling a whole lot more. What can you tell us?
There is a lot to unpack here. And first, I want to shout out Ed Werder and his incredible reporting on this, because the detail that we learned yesterday about Drew Brees' injury. So here's what we know. He suffered 3 fractured ribs on his left side against Tampa Bay in Week 9. But those were unnoticed, undetected, because the shoulder apparently was bothering him enough that he really didn't complain about the ribs. Part of the reason they found out about the left-sided rib fractures was because this past Sunday against the 49ers, when he took a big hit and went to the ground and then went out of the game, and you recall he could not come back in. Sean Payton remarked that it's rare that Drew Brees says he can't come back in the game. Well, when he took that hit, he apparently suffered 2 fractures on his right side, the ribs on the right side, and subsequently developed a pneumothorax, which in the common terms, you hear the term collapsed lung, and that was what was floating around yesterday. Basically, when a rib fractures, especially, you can get a sharp edge, and the ribs protect the organs underneath, specifically the lungs. And this is always the worry when players develop rib fractures, and there's a question about whether they're able to play. If there's a concern about a lung puncture, that's when they're held out until those ribs heal. Well, this happens simultaneously. So you get a puncture, you get a little bit of air between the chest wall and the lung, it puts pressure on it, makes it hard to breathe. Drew Brees couldn't get his breath, he was short of breath, and that's how it led to the testing that turned out to be these fractured ribs and the lung injury. Now, as far as treatment, it's really a matter of resting and letting the tissue heal. So you've got to let the lung heal, that takes a couple weeks. But you've also got to let the fractures heal to the point where you're not concerned about him taking another hit. And oh, by the way, the shoulder that was so problematic that he didn't notice the fractured ribs 2 weeks ago, that needs to rest as well. So there's a lot of layers to what has to happen before Drew Brees can return, and I don't think we really have any idea of a timeline at this point. And keep in mind, his former backup, Teddy Bridgewater, was also hurt. So not a great day for Saints quarterbacks past and present.
Okay, well, we'll get to Teddy in just a moment here, Stephania, but there is a conversation surrounding the Saints' next men up. And I say men because it may not just be one player. Let's start with Jameis Winston, Matt, because there's a lot of intrigue surrounding Jameis and his value. We'll talk about him a bit more later in the waiver wire section too, but I believe, and I could be wrong here, but I believe that Jameis Winston will be basically the full-time quarterback for the Saints with some Taysom Hill mixed in. What's your read on it?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, look, they were in the same situation last year where they had Teddy Bridgewater as the backup. They also had Taysom Hill, who'd been on the team longer than Teddy, obviously, and they like him. They like Taysom Hill in sort of that gadget, multi-use role, and so we'll get to Taysom Hill in a second, but I would argue that the playing time for Jameis Winston will be similar to what Teddy Bridgewater's was last year, which is that he's playing, 85% of the snaps or more at quarterback for the Saints, right?
I think it's basically a full-time job. This is why they signed him.
Yes.
And yes, people are going to ask, well, why did they extend Taysom Hill? Save that debate for another time. The Saints like Taysom Hill more than you like Taysom Hill. Just leave it at that for now. But speaking of Taysom Hill,
but should we talk about Jameis Winston's value?
We do it now. We're going to do it in waiver. We can do. Okay,
we'll do it in waivers. We'll get to waivers. Let's do it when we get to waivers.
Okay. Yeah.
All right.
So,
because Taysom Hill's an important piece too.
Taysom Hill is an important piece. And Taysom Hill, for those who may know this already, he's not rostered in a ton of leagues, but he was a tight end in our system going into today. ESPN has added quarterback eligibility for Taysom Hill. So if you want to add a quarterback and you want Taysom Hill to be that quarterback, you have the opportunity to add him. Now, the reality is that he probably still provides more value at tight end than he does at quarterback because it's unlikely that he's a full-time player there, but it's worth passing along. Maybe he's your priority at tight end, not at quarterback.
See, that's what I think it is. He doesn't. There's no universe in which you'd want to play Taysom Hill at a quarterback position and not a tight end position. Okay, there isn't.
Yeah.
I mean, like, there's the worst quarterback on your waiver wire is likely to score more fantasy points than Taysom Hill. However, the tight end position is such a wasteland. And even though we expect Jameis Winston to be basically the full-time quarterback of the Saints, the fact is that maybe Taysom Hill gets additional snaps at quarterback. They already use him in a variety of ways. They already use him for a handful of snaps when Drew Brees is on our center. So you could see an increase in snaps at quarterback for Taysom Hill, and they'll continue to use him at tight end, at running back, at wide receiver, all the different gadget sort of things that they do with Taysom Hill. And the point here is that, given how bad tight end is, Taysom Hill having tight end eligibility in our game suddenly becomes very interesting as we head into this waiver wire. And I think there's a couple things that are important to note here. At least for ESPN, I can't speak to any other provider if he plays somewhere else, but I can tell you what we're going to do here at ESPN. As you mentioned, he currently qualifies at tight end, and we are not going to change his eligibility after a week starts. So week 11 has started. He is a tight end for this week. Even if Sean Payton comes out later today and says, Taysom Hill's my starting quarterback for the entire game, we've cut Jameis Winston.
Correct.
Even if he says that, Taysom Hill is still a tight end this week. Now, we're reasonable people here. And so the people that are in charge of ESPN Fantasy, our games group here at ESPN, if after looking at snap data and looking at everything, they realize he's playing a lot more quarterback than anything else, they have the right to remove his tight end eligibility and make him a quarterback only. But again, they're not going to do that midweek. It would be before a scoring period. So you would know well in advance.
Yes.
All of this is my way of saying, like, Field, I don't know where he came in on your column, but I think he's, for the tight end needy, I think he's a bit of a priority if you need a tight end this week on waivers.
Yeah.
Because we expect an increase in usage for Taysom Hill at a variety of positions, including quarterback, and he's going to qualify at tight end.
Yeah, it's really an interesting ad. It's a very interesting ad. The hard part is we just don't know how it'll look. Like, it's possible that he'll kind of be what he has been for the entirety of the season, and while he's been okay recently, well, maybe if he's a tight end, it doesn't matter. But
well, that's the point.
Like, 6 or 7 points per game may actually be enough to utilize him in your tight end spot. I think he'll be somewhere like 12 to 15 amongst tight ends this week in ranking. So keep an eye on Taysom Hill.
I'm just saying, like, given how bad tight end is, I think, Thirsty Kyle, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I'm pretty sure Mark Andrews finished the week as tight end 1 with 13 fantasy points.
Correct.
13 fantasy points was tight end 1 this week. Right. So my point is, if you're telling me I got a tight end that's going to throw 4 passes a game, and usually, and they seem to use him more in the red zone than in the middle of the field.
Correct.
So I'm just saying, like, it's a wasteland out there. It's a tight end wasteland, not a teenage wasteland. It's a tight end wasteland out there. Someone do a parody of the Who song. And I don't know. Yeah, I think Taysom Hill is a really interesting waiver wire guy for those that are tight end needy, depending on the depth of your league.
Let's get back to the injury updates, and we go back to Stephania with Matthew Stafford. Yesterday, we got some news. He's dealing with a little bit of a thumb issue, Stephania. Any reason for concern?
Well, he says he hopes to be out there. Matthew Stafford has played through. We talked yesterday about how he played through that awful injury to his middle finger on his right hand and had a specially devised glove for it. A thumb is a little bit trickier because it's obviously very important to a quarterback as far as controlling the ball. And I think that's ultimately what's going to be the determining factor is, can he effectively throw? We saw that he was able to play through it, so certainly good chance for Stafford to be back this week, and that's what they're hoping for. Meanwhile, Andy Dalton down with the Cowboys, on track to play on Sunday. They got a practice in on Monday, and everything looks good so far, so expect Andy Dalton to return. Up in New York, Sam Darnold is going to miss another week. Do you guys remember this shoulder injury happened back in week 8? Looked bad when it happened. He came back. All of a sudden, that AC joint was problematic, and he has not been able to function effectively enough to play. Now, they opted not to place him on injured reserve, calling his injury week to week. Sam Darnold said he continues to feel better. He's doing everything he can to get back as soon as possible. Adam Gase says he's cautiously optimistic that he'll be back in week 12, but we know that he'll be out this week. And then Teddy Bridgewater, as reported by our Chris Mortensen, avoided major structural damage. If you saw that hit he took to his knee, got kind of bent inward on the right knee, not the knee that he dislocated back in 2016. So that was one good thing. Some soreness and swelling, but no major structural damage. And so they're feeling very good about that. Still unclear whether he'll be available this week or not.
Hey, Jets, if you're listening, shut it down with Darnold. Shut it down. He's hurt, and you need to take a bigger picture approach for the rest of this season. Stephania, one more injury update is another positive sign for the Eagles, who've gotten some good injury news recently.
Yes, designated to return, Zach Ertz. But as you know, that's still the 21-day window, so a lot depends on how he looks in practice. But at least he has been designated to return, so tick-tock, Zach Ertz.
21 days to, of course, activate him to the roster, which, if he returns, would mean the Eagles would have a semblance of what they wanted coming into the season. Zach Ertz, Dallas Goedert, plus Jalen Reagor, plus, of course, Travis Fulgham has been in their plans for years now. Alshon Jeffrey, maybe Deshaun Jackson eventually returns. Boston Scott, Miles Sanders.
But with the exception of Deshaun Jackson, and they've obviously found something in Travis Fulgham. With the exception of Deshaun Jackson, like once they get Zach Ertz back, like you're like, okay, this is what we expected out of the Eagles, and the NFC East is still wide open.
By the way, last word here on Zach Ertz is that Zach Ertz might have a chance to look much more like his old self when he's not being triple teamed every single play. So maybe when he comes back, he reestablishes some of the fantasy value he had basically in every season for like the past 4 prior to this year. Hey, question: do you own or rent your home?
I do.
Okay, sure you do.
Both.
And I bet it can be hard work. You know what's easy, though? Bundling policies with Geico. Geico makes it easy to bundle your homeowners or renters insurance along with your auto policy. It's a good thing, too, because you already have so much to do around your home. Go to geico.com, get a quote, and see how much you could save. It's Geico easy. Visit geico.com today. That's geico.com.
Truly Lemonade is a refreshing mix of lemonade and hard seltzer that is perfect for game day. If your life or fantasy lineup gives you lemons, make lemonade. Maybe even when you match up with a surprise standout, and keep the good times going with Truly. Bring the flavor to game day as only you can. We'll keep it light, crisp, and crushable. Truly Lemonade comes in 4 refreshing flavors: original strawberry, mango, and black cherry. Truly hard seltzer. Live Truly.
All right, it's time now for Smart Trade Decision, which is informed by IBM Watson, and we discuss a player who has been very, very, very disappointing this year, and a lot of that because of his own health. So I can't put this all on Michael Thomas, both an ankle and also a hamstring issue for him, but he's back practicing in full, and this past week he had 2 catches on 7 targets for 27 yards. You know, on Fantasy Football Now on Sundays, we give you the rundown of who was the most traded player, offered player, who was the most accepted player, who was the most declined player. Michael Thomas has been in the subject of those categories frequently. And I think better days are ahead for Michael Thomas. That's because I'm stating the obvious, right? It can't be any worse. And the matchups coming up are not scary by any stretch. You've got Atlanta, at Denver, at Atlanta, at Philadelphia. You certainly like both Atlanta matchups. And, you know, Denver and Philadelphia, you know, Darius Slay's a little bit scary. But still, the point is, it's not like he's got to face Jalen Ramsey each week for the next 4. Michael Thomas is going to have better days ahead. I'm just going to put this out there, though. I wouldn't be surprised, as we are now 8 days away from the ESPN fantasy trade deadline, if he's one of the most offered and accepted players in fantasy. Because if you've been riding with Michael Thomas throughout the year, your patience is probably run dry, Daniel. You're sitting there thinking to yourself, I used my first-round pick on a guy, got me 2 catches last week for 27 yards. Now, there might be an opportunist in your league who's willing to take on Michael Thomas. No problem. Let's do it. But it's been a weird year for Michael Thomas. Would not surprise me if he is frequently traded over the next 8 days.
Phil, can I ask a question about that?
Of course you can, yeah.
What kind of a player, let's say that you were somebody that did not roster Michael Thomas, if you believe that Michael Thomas has better days ahead of him, What level of player do you think could maybe get him to your team while also not giving up something that's too much in case Michael Thomas doesn't pan out? I mean, is there a middle ground there that we can even find?
Here's a scary thought, is that we were just talking about him earlier in the show, so the name came to mind. If you had Michael Thomas, Daniel,
Yep,
and you offered me Michael Thomas for Justin Jefferson,
ooh,
I might turn you down. Isn't that
Ooh.
crazy?
ooh,
Right? But, like, what would you do if the roles were reversed?
probably. I was the same thing. I was thinking T. Higgins in all honesty, but like
I
they're
would
so
probably
close
turn
to
it
each
down
other.
for 2 Higgins as well. I mean,
Yeah.
we could very, very much eat crow. We could eat crow in a major way. Michael Thomas could have 50 catches in the final 7 games. It wouldn't stun us, right?
Of course.
But at the same time, you probably don't have time to waste right now if you've been rostering Michael Thomas, which makes us part of the conundrum too. If he's your first-round pick, your team may not be in tip-top shape. If you're trading him away, you may be looking for a player that you can count on right away. So it's a very, very fascinating conundrum to have Michael Thomas on your roster with the way this season has played out up to this point. Waiver wire time?
I think it's waiver wire time
Let's
now.
do it.
Field Minister Yates, you, of course, write the waiver wire column for
Yes.
ESPN.com. It's up now and on the ESPN app. We're company men. And Josh Allen and, Josh Allen and, well, really Josh Allen, I guess.
Josh Allen's the most notable player on a bye this week.
Who's on a bye this week. Josh Allen's on a bye this week. We don't expect Drew Brees to play.
Right.
We probably not going to see Teddy Bridgewater, but maybe. We don't
Maybe.
know. That's
you're not
one
starting
still
him,
in the air.
right.
But the fact is you might need a quarterback this week. So let's talk. Do you want to talk Dumpsville first, like some quarterbacks that you're willing to get rid of?
Well, so let's just talk about Jameis Winston
okay.
for a second, okay? Because I put him on the waiver wire column, and this was probably more name value than anything else, right? This was like when Le'Veon Bell got cut, and it was like, wow, Le'Veon Bell. And now we've realized, like, dude, Le'Veon Bell, like, you put a different name on the back of his uniform, and he's no longer Stephania's cousin, and he's no longer talked about like that much, right? So Jameis, yes, there's name value involved here. But he's also quarterback 6 on the season last year. And our friends, well, we have many friends here at ESPN Fantasy, but Eric Caraval wrote about his potential value. And Eric's argument was that, like, is it that crazy to think that Jameis Winston could be a more valuable quarterback in this Saints offense this year for fantasy than Drew Brees was? He's not going to be Drew Brees. Drew Brees is the most accurate quarterback of ever. But there are going to be some trade-offs, right? Jameis, a little bit more aggressive as a thrower. Jameis, a little bit, not a ton, a little bit more mobile as a runner, right? Drew Brees is the master of the leap over the pile for a 1-yard quarterback sneak touchdown.
Right.
Jameis is like okay from 10 yards and in, right?
Yeah.
Not super mobile, but he's giving you some value with his legs, as we saw last season. So I don't know that anybody really, really needs a quarterback right now, unless you have Josh Allen, you've been going the one quarterback route, but he would be on the radar for me. Not moving mountains there, but he would be on the radar.
I think so. To your point, there's a lot of weapons in New Orleans, right? So Michael Thomas is healthy now. They've got Emmanuel Sanders back. Obviously, you've got Jared Cook, and I know Traquan Smith is banged up, but like they have Marquez Callaway, and they've got some other guys there. And to your point, like you said, a little bit more aggressive. I was going to say YOLO, right?
YOLO,
Definitely, like Jameis Winston is a YOLO quarterback, and so. Yeah, and by the way, you have a guy in Alvin Kamara that at any point you can just dump it off and he can turn a 2-yard 2-yard pass into a 20-yard reception. So I do think so. I do think that they might be a little bit more aggressive with Jameis Winston, and that what you lose in accuracy and efficiency with Jameis, you might gain in terms of more aggressiveness and more down the field throws. So look. Everyone was just, I will say this. I think fantasy-wise, Jameis Winston will be a better quarterback than Teddy Bridgewater. You know what I mean? Again, more aggressive, big arm guy, and they have more weapons in New Orleans than they did last year when Teddy Bridgewater filled in. And Teddy Bridgewater was fine.
Yeah.
I mean, they've added Emmanuel Sanders.
Right.
I would argue Emmanuel Sanders is an upgrade from what they had last year.
It just, with the way that Michael Thomas is playing, that's the part that I'm sort of like, I don't know quite know, but I get your point.
Yeah. I mean, Michael Thomas has had one game back.
Yep.
But still. Huh? Right.
2 games back, but still, I get what you're saying. It's not, we don't have to.
Yeah. Debate that much. I do think he's worth I agree with you. He's worth a flyer. It's just a question of whether you want to roster 2 quarterbacks, right?
Have
we've
we
got
done your rankings for this week?
I have not as of yet. I do them after the show on Tuesday.
So I think I have him at 16. So that's the rub, right? Is that like I can't tell you to add a guy that's probably a 1 week option, right? If you're like replacing Josh Allen, am I telling you to add the guy that's 16th in my quarterback rankings for the week? Anyways, it's hard for us to find a lot of room for quarterbacks in the waiver wire conversation this year. There is our offering on Jameis Winston. Let's keep things rolling, shall we?
Yeah, if you're trying to replace Josh Allen, who are your quarterbacks? Like let's just if you're trying to replace Drew Brees or Josh Allen, who are you rolling with this week? That's available more than 50% of ESPN leagues.
That's why I put Jameis on there because there's really nobody. But my guess is that a lot of people that have Josh Allen, Matthew, already have a second quarterback on their roster. It's my guess.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think of like, is Cam rostered in less than 50% at this point?
Nope.
Way more.
Oh, interesting.
There really isn't.
Guaranteed quarterback.
There really isn't anybody.
Yeah, Derek Carr. Listen, I know Derek Carr's been brutal the last couple of weeks, but playing Kansas City, he had, I want to say 25 fantasy points against the Chiefs the last time they played. You're not going to get away with no touchdowns against the Chiefs.
I prefer Jameis, though.
All right, fair. Okay, well, there you go.
Let's move forward here.
Yes, sir. Let's move forward then now to running backs, right? And waiver wire running backs, Lemons into Lemonade is brought to you by Truly Lemonade. Truly Lemonade is a refreshing mix of lemonade and hard seltzer that is perfect for game day. If life or your fantasy lineup gives you lemons, make lemonade. Keep the good times going with Truly, Truly Hard Seltzer. Live Truly. Lemons into Lemonade is brought to you by Truly Hard Seltzer. So let's talk running backs now, Field Yates.
That's right. And we want to begin, and I got to make sure that I correct this right away. Savon Ahmed.
Yes.
Dolphins running back. I've completely butchered his name a couple of times up to this point. Savon Ahmed. And I apologize for that. That's how you pronounce it properly. It's not phonetic, so to speak. But he is the new starting running back for the Miami Dolphins. He's available in 99.6% of leagues. Like Adam Schefter's the only person I know that's actually picked up Ahmed prior to this past week's game. He was good, though. 21 carries, 85 yards, and a touchdown. The Dolphins have apparently cornered the market on Washington running backs as both Myles Gaskin and Ahmed played their college football with the Huskies. We don't know when Matt Breida will be back. But we know that Myles Gaskin has to miss at least one more game.
Right.
I think Ahmed's their starter until Myles Gaskin returns.
Nothing he did last week would suggest that they're going to go away from him. I mean, this is a guy that got almost every running back carry that they had. Next two games come against defenses that are 18th or worse against opposing running backs, right? And last week in Week 10, they had 7 running back carries in the red zone. 6 of them went to Ahmed. He got 21 of the 26 overall running back carries. And as you pointed out, the guy was productive. Like, he scored a touchdown. He had 85 rushing yards. My question to you, here's a question, because I ended up picking up Ahmed in a couple of leagues. Yes, on Sunday morning.
You and Shefty. Okay,
honestly, when Shefty made him his long shot, I was just like, I raised my eyebrows at that because Shefty's plugged in. He doesn't make that call just out of the blue, right? He's been told something.
He wasn't grinded the Washington tape.
I'm just Shefty's using what he's got, right? Shefty's got sources in every nook and cranny of the world, and and they're telling him, hey, there's something here with Ahmed. So great call by Shefty. So my question to you though is, because I'm trying to sit here because our trade debt value is up. Like, what's his trade value? Like, should I go make an offer for Myles Gaskin? Here's my reasoning. Like, do we think when Myles Gaskin is back that Myles Gaskin is the guy, or do you think this is a committee?
I think it's Gaskin with a little bit of a lighter load. But then again, like, Myles Gaskin could be 6 weeks. It's an MCL sprain.
Right.
So it could be 6 weeks. Like, this is only week 3 of it. Like, they could be saying, like, yeah, we'll figure that out, but it might be week 15 by the time we're figuring that out.
Yeah, Stephania, do you, not to put you on the spot here, Stephania, but I'm just curious if you have any, but I'm gonna. Just typically an MCL sprain, just can you give us a range here? Any thoughts on Myles Gaskin?
Well, the range is huge depending on the severity, and we've seen guys come back within 2 weeks, 2 to 3, and we've seen them take, like Nick Chubb just came back after missing 6. So, this is it really depends on the degree of injury and how the player is able to function.
So
bottom
there's
line.
A lot of backs in the Miami backfield. We do know, as we saw this yesterday, Jordan Howard was waived. So Jordan Howard's time in Miami is a brief and abrupt one, as he is no longer with the Dolphins. He'll go to waivers today.
But anyway, I would think Ahmed is a priority on the waiver wire if you need somebody. Certainly this week, again, look, his upcoming schedule, at Denver, at the Jets, home to Cincinnati, home to Kansas City. 4 pretty good matchups coming up if you're a running back. Again, we'll see what happens with the Gaskin there, but certainly you would think this week he's going to be the guy.
Kalen Ballage, former Dolphin, now seems to be the guy in Los Angeles. He has run well over the past 2 weeks, nearly 140 rushing yards for the Chargers. He had 5 catches this past week, too. Matthew, we can have fun with jokes, but we don't really have that much time today. The bottom line is this looks like the guy that you were previously excited about.
Yeah, listen, he's big, he's fast, he can catch the ball. What do you know? Another guy that got out of Adam Gase's system and found success in the NFL. Certainly not efficient, but the volume is masking that inefficiency. It is a time for another Ballage barrage. It's time to check into the Ballage Mahal.
Let's keep things rolling here. One more running back to note. He's on a bye this week, but Devontae Freeman's on IR, and you need to have Wayne Gallman on your rosters, more rosters than he is currently on. He's got 5 touchdowns in his past 4 games. He's running well. Joe Judge really likes the player, so I think there's a chance that Wayne Gallman retains the starting job until Devontae Freeman returns from IR, and maybe even beyond that. Good to see Wayne Gallman making positive contributions for the Giants. He's a good pass catcher as well. All right, we'll come back. Oops, I got to speak into the microphone when I'm talking, but I had to grab my iPad.
Just one guy I want to mention real quickly is that Devontae Booker's had a nice couple of games here.
No.
Listen, that's game script dependent.
Right.
I'm just merely saying that, listen, Josh Jacobs is rostered in 100% of leagues. I think Devontae Booker is somebody that should be added to that insurance list of the Tony Pollards, the Alexander Madisons, the Latavius Murrays of the world, that if something were to happen to Jacobs, I do think Booker would have success.
I completely agree as an insurance policy.
That's what
it's really
I'm saying.
hard
Correct.
for me to say, like, oh, yeah, he's going to make my top 40 running back.
100%. I'm just saying, if I had, as we're heading towards the stretch run, if I had Josh Jacobs on my team, I would want Devontae Booker.
True dat. Let's talk about wide receivers in just a moment. But first, the pressure that you feel heading into a fantasy draft?
Dude.
You want to make sure you're picking the right guys to get the job done.
Always.
Because whatever your strategy is, at the end of the day, it all comes down to who's on your team. What we really need is something like ZipRecruiter for fantasy football, which tragically they don't make yet. But ZipRecruiter in the real world makes hiring easier than ever, and right now you can try it for free at ZipRecruiter.com/06010. ZipRecruiter sends your job to over 100 of the web's leading job sites, scanning thousands of applicants and actively inviting the most qualified candidates to apply, so you can hire the right people fast. In fact, 4 out of 5 employers post on ZipRecruiter find a quality candidate within the first day. Man, imagine if we had something like ZipRecruiter during fantasy drafts. We'd never lose. Try ZipRecruiter for free today when you post your job at ZipRecruiter.com/06010. That's ZipRecruiter.com/06010. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire.
Whatever you want to protect, nobody has more ways to help keep you safe than ADT. You can customize an ADT security package to help protect your home in a way that works for you and your budget. Whether you want just the basics or all the bells and whistles, ADT can work with you to customize the system to help protect your home. HD video doorbells, indoor and outdoor cameras, smart lights, smart locks, smart thermostats, flood sensors, and fire and carbon monoxide detectors that are all connected to 24/7 monitoring, controlled by the sound of your voice or the ADT app. All ADT products are rigorously tested to deliver the quality that you'd expect from ADT, the most trusted name in home security. And get this, ADT expert installers average 10+ years of experience. Now, ADT wants you to be happy with your ADT service. That's why they provide one of the best money-back guarantees from a national security provider. Protect now and pay later with low, flexible monthly payments to fit your budget. Support our friends at ADT because they support us at the Fantasy Focus Football Podcast.
Here we go with wide receiver waiver ads and tight ends for the week. We'll rip through them very quickly. I will start in New England, where Jakobi Meyers, not just catching passes, he's also throwing touchdown passes. Jakobi Meyers had a 24-yard touchdown pass this past week, but more importantly, the target share right now is unmistakable in New England. The team is actually getting some level of reinforcements back with Julian Edelman eventually returning, and he's eligible to play as soon as this week. We'll see if he actually does, but Jakobi Meyers is going to be a thing. His target share has been legit over the past 3 weeks, and the Patriots offense, this ain't the Chiefs, but they have found a little bit of life over the past couple of weeks. They look to take advantage of that momentum against a bad Texans secondary on Sunday. I think Jakobi Meyers will crack the top 30 for wide receiver ranks this week. We'll keep it in the division, by the way, and a player's on a bye this week is Cole Beasley. Beasley, though, has been red hot. He was the top-scoring wide receiver in fantasy this past week, and there was a time where we talked about Cole Beasley in the same segment on the show, and he had gone, I think, 6 straight games with double-digit fantasy points after 9.8 in week 1. But then he cratered. He had back-to-back bad games in fantasy. But the bottom line is this. Cole Beasley needs to be rostered on more than 44% of leagues on ESPN Fantasy. He is a very, very capable fill-in for your flex option. He's currently on pace, I believe, for up over 1,000 receiving yards and something like 80 catches. The guy has been a real playmaker for the Bills this season. In the interest of time, I'll just bring it right here to the tight ends and just give you one name. We mentioned Taysom Hill earlier. Lagan Thomas, Washington football team, 4 catches, 66 yards this past week, and he has 5 games this season, I believe it is, with at least 4 catches. And before you tell me 5 games with 4 catches, like that's what you're touting for tight ends? Yeah, that's what I'm touting for tight ends, because if you play in an offense where the tight end is even remotely involved and you're an athlete like Lagan Thomas, you have a chance to be fantasy relevant. As Matthew just mentioned, 13 fantasy points was tight end 1 for this past week. Mark Andrews, in that sloppy, wet game between the Patriots and Ravens, caught enough passes to become tight end 1 for the week. We cannot wait to have you back, Travis Kelce, this upcoming week.
Can I just mention one quick tight end as well? Again, similar to like Gallman, like he's on a bye this week, but Jordan Reed played a lot of snaps, ran a lot of routes last week. 5 for 62.
Yeah.
And then look at their upcoming schedule when they get out of the bye. So they're at the Rams, all right, whatever. But then Buffalo, Washington. Here's his fantasy playoff schedule, Jordan Reed's. Washington in week 14, Dallas at week 15, at Arizona in week 16. I mean, it's a nice schedule there.
Unpredictable, obviously, in terms of how much usage he will get week to week, but it also ties into George Kittle, who Stephania has an update on.
Well, I think it's just if you were holding on to him, I would say, even me, who's the loyal 49ers person of the crew of us, have said, go ahead and drop George Kittle. And I'll tell you why. As optimistic as George Kittle is, he's dealing with a fractured cuboid bone. It's a fracture in the midfoot. And we've already talked about how when you have sprains, how serious these are. Similar thing. You have to let this fracture fully heal. And I just would go back to the press conference Shanahan had after Kittle was injured and when he learned what it was. And he said that he had been told it was about 8 weeks before Kittle could return. But he said Kittle said he'd be back in 2. They placed him on injured reserve. They're like, that's how he rolls, but we're going to make sure that he's fully better before we allow him back into the conversation. So if you think that about the fact that he was injured in week 8 and you're looking at 8 weeks to come back, it really wouldn't make any sense unless they were headed for the playoffs. And quite frankly, I'm not sure they'll have a full roster by the time the playoffs roll around.
All right, so if you've been holding on to George Kittle in a redraft league and you need a roster spot, sounds like Kittle is a safe drop. Maybe he plays a couple games at the end, but it's going to be hard to make it there without George Kittle on your roster anyways. Let's do what we do around this time of the podcast each week, which is rank top 5 waiver ads of the weekend. This is my preference, not saying that you necessarily need to follow exactly, but some food for thought here.
Okay.
Savon Ahmed.
Yep.
He's going to be my number 1 pickup there. The guy's so new to the game. He doesn't even have a headshot here. Kenny Mayne actually gave me a scouting report because Kenny's daughter went to middle school with Savon Ahmed. So Kenny Mayne was actually ahead of Shefty, scooped Shefty on Savon Ahmed. He sent me a message last week saying this kid is the real deal. Good to see Ahmed making a mark in Miami. Number 2 for me would be Kalen Ballage. What a world we've come to where Kalen Ballage is a priority waiver ad, but as we just talked about, he's been running well, and Justin Jackson on IR. He's going to miss at least 2 more games. Austin Eckler doesn't sound like he's ready to return yet for at least 1 more week. You have an opportunity to probably rely on Kalen Ballage. Troymaine Pope and Josh Kelly took a back seat to Ballage this past week for the Chargers against the Dolphins. Number 3 for me, and we didn't talk about him in the running back rankings, but it's Nyheim Hines, who trails only Dalvin Cook in terms of games with at least 2 touchdowns scored. And you might get a game where he has 4 total touches, but Nyheim Hines, if you look at this Indy offense, it's not necessarily clicking on all cylinders every single week, but good things tend to happen when Nyheim Hines has the football in his hands. And we've talked about this for a while. Few quarterbacks are better at getting their running backs involved in the passing game than Phillip Rivers. I like Hines there as well. Number 4 for me is Jakobi Meyers. Talked about him just a minute ago. Again, he's been really productive for the Patriots over the past 3 weeks, and there's a growing rapport between he and Cam Newton. Target share has been very, very good over the past few weeks, 3 games specifically, and even in that terrible set of conditions this past week, he too had 6 catches for 59 yards. So even if you take away that touchdown pass, still got you over double-digit fantasy points this past week. And then I like Matthew. You talked me into this one. Taysom Hill at tight end. The reason why he gets the edge over Jameis Winston is just that it's so much harder to find tight ends than it is quarterbacks. So a reminder, Taysom Hill can be used for this week as a tight end or a quarterback. We will reevaluate this one at the end of the week based off how the Saints actually deploy he and Jameis Winston with the Atlanta Falcons on tap this Sunday. But for right now, that's how we have it set up. Tight end and quarterback eligible for Taysom Hill. Number 5 amongst our waiver wire ads. Anything you would have done decidedly differently there?
I'd have Jakobi Meyers higher. Obviously, it all depends on sort of team needs here.
Yeah, I'm always going for running backs heavy.
Which is understandable. But basically, all of the running backs are potentially very quick fill-in, 1 or 2 weeks, right? We expect Gaskin back eventually. Like Ahmed would be my number 1 there, but Balaj, we expect Eckler back at some point. Like Jakobi Meyers, I think is going to be a thing.
He could be there for the rest of the season.
I think he's there for the rest of the season. So I'd probably have Jakobi Meyers higher in my ranks there. And again, it sort of depends on your tight end needs, right? But Taysom Hill this week, Lagan Thomas longer. Certainly Lagan Thomas this week against Cincinnati. Cincinnati really struggles against opposing tight ends. They give the second most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. So that would be something there. And if you're needing a defense, the Chargers, they get the Jets. There you go. Hashtag analysis.
Daniel, have at it, buddy.
So I want to throw to some social questions here, if you guys don't mind. I actually put on Twitter last week, I couldn't believe how weird the running back position was because going into the week, Ronald Jones was running back 13, which just seems crazy. Spoiler alert, he's inside the top 10 now, full-time at running back, which is just crazy.
That is crazy.
But I want to throw it over to you, Field, because I got a social question that I really liked. I just wanted you guys to be able to talk about where we're at as the face of fantasy right now when we look at how bad the running backs and tight ends seemingly have been this year.
That's right. They have been very bad, Daniel. And this question comes from John Linguist, who says, running backs and tight ends you can start with confidence is the lowest I can remember in recent history. Scoring up across the league. Go figure. Are running quarterbacks changing the fantasy landscape or just a weird year? A lot of great points there made by John.
Yeah.
So first of all, he's right in how many quarterbacks are impacting the game as a runner.
Yeah.
Best runner on their team, Lamar Jackson, Cam Newton, Kyler Murray, Josh Allen.
You can
make the case as a finisher, right?
Allen.
Like as a finishing back. So you've got, maybe, and I'm sure there are a couple others you could make that case for. So
Tua could end up being one of them.
Tua could eventually be there as well. You've got a handful of quarterbacks already that look like clear-cut, very solid, decisive runners. I also think this is probably about how many great wide receivers we have in this league because think about, Justin Jefferson seems like he's the real deal, right?
Sure.
Is he the 30th best wide receiver in football?
Yeah, it's somewhere in there.
40th?
I mean, right. It's like,
right.
Yeah, it's
he looks
ridiculous.
like, you're like, oh my God, this guy's a star. And then you're like, oh, he might not even be one of the top 30 in his position. I get that. Maybe
right.
that's too unkind to him. But my point is that whereas if we had an absolute flat out star at running back performance like last night, we'd be like, is that guy one of the, 15, 12 top backs in fantasy this year? So talking fantasy football wise, that's my point. So I think there's so many wide receivers.
So I think there's a couple of things here. So first off, in terms of quarterbacks rushing, you make the point about hey, is this quarterback the best runner on his team, right? And there's a lot of, you named a bunch of them. Philip Rivers, another guy I would probably mention as well.
And Brady definitely comes to mind.
And legit Philip Rivers could be the best runner on the Colts. That's more about the Colts running backs than. No, I'm joking. But listen, the fact is that I think you're right. And if you go back and look at my draft day manifesto, we talked about this in the manifesto a lot about the impact that rushing has on quarterbacks and how, the stat off the top of my head was something like 8 of the top 9 fantasy quarterbacks over the last couple of years have over 200 rushing yards. Yeah. And so there's that. The running backs, Daniel Jones? Yeah, listen, Daniel Jones, what fantasy value Daniel Jones has been all about his rushing. Okay. So then you add Carson Wentz has started to, he's run a little bit more, right? So the other piece of it here is in terms of running backs, there's just been so many injuries. And I think it's a weird year because, again, with COVID-19 and it was just an accelerated ramp up to the season, I think, and also just some bad luck. So we've just seen, just massive injuries in the first round. The first round was almost entirely running backs, right? And we talked about it. Kamara, Cook, Henry are basically the only 3 guys that haven't disappointed. CEH has been whatever. But right? I mean,
yeah, no, I get it.
Right,
You're
and
right.
even Michael Thomas, who was the one non-running back going in the first round consensus-wise, he's been injured.
Last
Tight end is just a blank show.
Last thought, running back committees rule the roost in a lot of cases in the NFL. Let's keep it going here as we move forward to Zach May's question, who says, if you are deep at a specific position, would you rather trade away some depth to improve another position or hold the depth to play matchups and guard against injury? I tell you what, man, maybe Matthew feels differently or Stephania feels differently, but I'm managing my team to optimize my chances to win. In a lot of cases, that is putting as much control in my roster as opposed to preventing others from putting control in their roster. So if I have incredible depth at wide receiver and I have a chance to upgrade my running back spot, yeah, somebody else might stand to benefit because I'm losing one of my usable wide receivers. But I want to make my starting lineup as strong as I possibly can every single week, not only because that's just a comfortable feeling. There are leagues, I was telling Matthew about this before the show got started. I'm in a league, 6-point passing touchdown league, and I've got Brady and Russell Wilson. And now I sweat going into Sundays, wondering if I'm going to pick the right one or not. Optimize your own lineup. Everybody else, I get it. You can play a little defense, but I would rather go big on my own lineup.
I agree with that. The only exception I would make is I would want insurance to my number 1 running back. When you know there's a clear cut, like we said, Tony Pollard to Zeke, Alexander Madison to Dalvin Cook, that kind of situation, Latavius Murray, where we know there's a clear-cut guy that would be the guy and that we expect them to have success should something happen to the starting running back.
Let's go ahead, and Daniel is going to recap yesterday as we had a trade, or we're going to have a trade between Matthew and Daniel based off of the Washington and Detroit Lions game from Sunday. Daniel, remind everybody where we're at and what we decided to do.
All right, so here's where we're at. I got to protect 2 players from my roster
and
that Matthew did not have. I chose Christian McCaffrey and DeAndre Hopkins. Pretty good choices.
Yes, indeed.
And now that leaves the rest of everybody for Matthew to be able to choose from. I know that we put out a poll kind of taking the temperature of everyone else to kind of figure out where we were at. Matthew Berry, it looks like the majority of people came in with Chris Carson for Kalen Ballage was 50% of the vote. Kyler Murray for Tom Brady, 32% of the vote. And A.J. Brown for Mike Williams, 18% of the vote. So overwhelming majority running back swap here, Matthew. But I'm curious, what it is that you're thinking about doing?
Yeah, look, and I put it up on my Instagram as well. And weirdly, on Instagram, most people voted for Kyler Murray.
Wow.
I think, listen,
he's very good on the ground.
He's yes, and listen, Kyler Murray is awesome, but the upgrade from Tom Brady to Kyler Murray, especially given how good Tom Brady's playoff schedule is, isn't significant enough as the upgrade from Chris Carson to another running back on my team, DJ Dallas.
Ooh.
So I think that's what I'm going to do here, Secret Squirrel. I'm going to keep Kalen Ballage.
Are you?
I am going to keep Kalen Ballage, but I will trade you DJ Dallas for Chris Carson.
I can't believe that Matthew's team lost, and he weaseled his way.
I know!
Getting Chris Carson.
I know.
It's like such
We
it's the most
are- I said,
Matthew
what do you
move.
guys want to do for the bet? Like, this is what you guys – it was Daniel's idea for the bet.
It was my idea. That's true.
That's
It's fine.
fair. Well done, Daniel.
Are you
All
sure?
right.
But Jared Cook is still available,
He
Matthew.
is
Are you
still
sure you don't wanna
available.
do Jared Cook?
Jared Cook's
It's
still available.
fine.
Okay.
But listen, I'm glad we just did that now, Secret Squirrel. I hope DJ Dallas performs very well for you. I
Me
don't think
too.
it matters because your team is awesome. But I think it's important for all of us here at the 060 to acknowledge it is your birthday today.
it
it is
is.
Secret Squirrel's birthday. I am wearing, in honor of you, I'm wearing a crappy band you've never heard of T-shirt.
Oh, my
so
God.
this is Suburban Legends, which is a ska band out of California that I like a lot.
Pick it up, pick it up, pick it up.
Yep, there you go. And and we have a picture of you, Secret Squirrel.
great.
And you can see it there.
Oh, so cute.
Wow.
This is how adorable you were.
Wow.
You
You
didn't
didn't
pop
pop
out
out
of
were. What do you mean were?
Yeah. How old are you in this picture,
Oh,
Dan?
the hair.
I was, I believe, 3 years old in that picture.
Yeah.
Daniel, where
Oh
are
my
your
gosh.
earrings?
I know. I did not just come out of the womb like that as much as you would expect. I was a big baby, though, 10 pounds, 1 ounce, in case you guys didn't.
not
You
only
were a big old baby.
oh,
really?
you have no idea. 10 pounds, 1 ounce at birth.
I love Mama Dopp more right now than I ever did before.
Mama Dopp slid into my DMs to let me know that it was like a 10-hour labor, as you can imagine, for a baby that big. But she still loves you.
Oh, that's
and
good.
she desperately wishes she could be here today to celebrate with you. But she's very, very proud of you, as all of us here at the 06010 are. Daniel, we love you. We want to celebrate your birthday. We're happy you were born.
Me too.
And Stephania, before the show, talked to me and Field and said she would like it if she could sing happy birthday to you by herself.
Oh my gosh.
So great.
I'm told in my ear that requires rights payments. So unfortunately, I can't sing for you, Daniel. But I'm singing on the inside.
Well, she'll do it on the internet. I think what Stephania has told me is that she will do it on Twitter. She'll post it to her Twitter account, just a happy birthday song to you, directly to you.
That
just
means a lot.
Singing by
Thank
herself.
you, Stephania, so much for that. You're such a generous soul. I really appreciate it.
Oh, well, I try.
We would be, it's impossible to encapsulate just how much Daniel means to all of us, to this show. We hope that all you, the listeners, appreciate what he means to us, and I am sure you do. Daniel, enjoy this day, bud. We love you, and nobody is better than Mr. Daniel Dopp.
Please wish him a happy birthday on Twitter at Daniel Dopp or on Instagram at Something to Break. Daniel, we heart you.
I heart you guys too. And if you guys don't mind me saying, really quickly, I just want to say this as like the one thing I want for my birthday. There are 3 records that I've really loved this year, and I want to tell people about it. It's Punisher by Phoebe Bridgers. Please go out and check it out. It's an incredible record. Someday I'll Make It All Up to You by Tyson Motzenbacher. Those two, that one and Punisher, have just been amazing for my mental health as we've been home and dealing with quarantining. And then also No Good Left to Give by a band called Movements is absolutely incredible if you're looking for something a little bit, a little bit heavier than the first 2 records I gave you. So love all 3 of those. I just want to tell you thank you for giving me that time here on my birthday to talk about some crappy bands you guys have never heard of.
There you go. May your Lions go undefeated forever, Daniel. Much love to you from everyone in the 06010 Nation. Happy birthday, my friend. From all of us, you are awesome, and we love you. Peace out.
It's no secret, not a mystery. The one that we depend on for all our podcast needs. Graduate, Full Sail U, a Lions fan through and through. With the hippest beard, I'm telling you.